How you place your sticks on the hi-hat actually determines how easy or difficult it is to play smoothly and quickly. Have you ever been sitting there watching and listening to your favorite drummer and wondering, why do their hi-hats sound so much better than mine? Well, if you're dealing with clumsy, amateur sounding hi-hat playing, first off, pat yourself on the back for admitting that. Trust me, I've been there. Then today's lesson is for you. The truth is, you may actually be making things harder on yourself by ignoring these three elements of great hi-hat sound, which even a total beginner can get results from today. So if you're with me, let's get your hi-hat sounding a little bit more like what you hear on your favorite records here in the next 15 minutes. You can do this. Hey, welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. I help self-taught beginner drummers know what to practice so that they can nail songs, sound awesome, and sound professional, and be that drummer that other people want to jam with and have in their band. And hey, while you're here, I've got a free gift for you in the description. If you've ever struggled with just feeling like you don't know what to practice, you're overwhelmed with the amount of things out there online that you could be practicing and that everybody's telling you to practice, and you're like, I want to grow, I want to master the drums, but I don't know where to focus. I've got the free resource for you. It's called the 3-part daily practice routine for the busy drummer. It's a 30-minute practice routine that's made up of 3 parts. You can spend 10 minutes on each. And when you focus on each of these 3 parts, you end up making steady progress. Because what we've done is we've condensed, here are all the things you could be practicing, but here are the most important things. And as long as you focus on your hand technique, you focus on building coordination, and you focus on music and listening, if you're consistently working in those 3 areas, you make rapid progress, and your practicing is balanced. There's no holes, you don't leave anything out, there's no skill left behind, and you end up actually mastering the drums in the long term. And so if that's you, if you're wanting to grow in 2024, then go grab that guide. It's totally free. The Know What to Practice guide for busy drummers is in the description below. All right, on with today's lesson. So I'm guessing that if you're here today, then your hi-hat playing is sounding probably the way mine did a few years ago, where it's stiff, it's kind of clumsy, it's just not smooth, and you're also finding that your hand gets tired all the time. If you're trying to play, tight, molar type grooves, like you're finding it gets tired, especially if it's like a shuffle groove. Those kinds of things, or if you're playing like Superstition by Stevie Wonder. Those kinds of like funky grooves, if that is just wearing your hands out, nothing sounds smooth, then yeah, trust me, I've been there. There was a time in my playing, I was actually kind of fresh out of college. I was playing professionally, and my hand was just getting tired. I could do the molar thing. I could do it. I'd always been able to do it. I kind of, I had the chops, I had the motion and everything, but it was just feeling more difficult than it should have been. And I found that my hi-hats just weren't sounding great. I was watching my favorite drummers and I was noticing, wow, they sound so much better. And it's funny how we tend to gravitate toward assuming, well, something must be wrong with my hi-hats. Maybe they have higher quality maybe they bought those $400 hi-hats. That's why they sound so, no. 99% of the time, the problem is us and our technique, not our gear. And so that's what I had to admit. And I was struggling with this until after watching my favorite drummers playing the hi-hats, I started to notice that every one of them had this one thing in common. And that's where we're going with this today. By positioning your stick and your left foot properly on the hats, you'll automatically get a higher quality sound, feel, and response from your hi-hats. And so this is super simple today. We're going to talk about optimizing 3 things. And when you optimize these 3 things, 2 of which are pretty much instantaneous. Even if you're a total beginner, you're going to get results from this here in the next few minutes of working on this. The 3rd thing is a little bit more of the, the long-term skill to be focusing on and building. There's always some work involved. I'm going to be straight with you. There's always some practicing and some work involved because we have to better ourselves in order to get a great feel and a great sound. But hey, these first 2 things are pretty hackish, and these first 2 things were what I discovered after watching my favorite drummers and realizing, oh, that's what they're doing. How about I'm going to try that? That's way easier, and everything gets better. So, thing number 1, stick placement. This is so critical. This is why I said it at the very beginning of the video. Did you know that stick placement determines how easy or difficult it is to play the stuff you want to play? If you're positioning your stick in the wrong place, everything's going to feel stiff and clumsy, no matter how much skill you might have. That's the interesting thing here. And so you could be coming from that direction where you've been practicing and practicing and you've got the molar motion down, but it's not sounding good. This could be you. We've got to optimize the stick position. And really there's a couple of different factors here. First is stick position, so what part of the stick is striking the hi-hats? And the second big thing is what angle are we striking the hats at? Now, I guess the third thing we're not really talking about is what part of the hi-hats are we hitting? I remember when I first started playing, I was playing on an E-kit, and so in order to make a sound out of my electric hi-hat pad, I had to hit up here. And so I remember going to my first drum lesson, because I'd been kind of self-taught for a couple years on the electric kit, and my drum set teacher was like, "Why are you only playing up here? You'll get a better hi-hat sound if you drop down to the edge some." I was like, oh, well, if I do that on my kit at home, it doesn't make a sound. So that's the thing about electric kits. Sometimes they can be misleading in that way. And so maybe you're on an electric kit, you do what you got to do. But with real hats, you're going to get a better, more smooth kind of rock sound. And we're going to talk a little more about why this is by dropping down to the edge. So once we've established that, okay, we want to keep time here with the edge of the hi-hats. That way we've got both cymbals really interacting with each other. So the two most important things then are, what part of our stick are we using to hit it? Are we hitting the edge of the hats with the neck of the stick, with the shoulder of the stick, or with the shaft of the stick? And at what angle are we doing it? So the part of the stick, this is so critical, because what you'll notice, if you hit the edge of the hi-hats, like right here at this angle, with the shaft of the stick, pretty much no rebound, right? It just flops on there. We get this nice thick sound. But if we're going to play something fast, that sounds stiff to me. That sounds clumsy. It just sounds like it's dragged down. We're dragging through the mud. And believe it or not, that's what I was trying to do at one point. Now, as you slide the stick down to here, if you go to the shoulder, so the shoulder is where it starts to taper. Of course, depending on your sticks, that taper might be at a different point. These are 5A sticks. 5As and 5Bs have kind of the same taper point. But if you hit with the shoulder, okay, now did you notice we have that slight little bounce there? So that's cool. That means we get a little bit more response. Okay, what if we do it now? Okay, that works. It's kind of thick sounding. It's a little bit less clumsy. We're getting there. But now, what if we go to this third position? What if we go to the neck of the stick? If we're calling this the shaft, this the shoulder, and this is the head, the tip of the stick, then this right here would be the neck. So what if we go to the neck right here? It suddenly it feels exponentially easier to play quickly, because look at the rebound we get here. That was a decent hop there. We got like an inch of rebound, which is a lot for the edge of the hats. When we were here with the shoulder, we got a tiny little hop. Now here with the neck, there's a decent hop. Compared to shaft, pretty much nothing. Slight, tiny little hop, but we won't even count that. So you see the difference and how much of a massive difference we get between hitting the hi-hats here, hitting them here. And we're not even changing the angle. We haven't even talked about angle, really. I think the angle isn't something we even need to talk that much about, because it's kind of self-explanatory. If you're gonna hit the hi-hat right here with the neck, you know that you don't want to be here, because then the tip hits the top. But you don't want to be so steep that you start to lose some of that rebound that we get, and your hand starts to hit the hi-hat. So your hand starts to hit the snare, not the hi-hat. If your hand is running into the snare as you're playing the hi-hat, then your angle is too steep. Now, some rock drummers like to have their hats jacked up way up here, and you can see how ridiculously tall this hi-hat stand is. I have no idea why DW makes them this tall. I could have the hi-hats up here, and I could just be going like this, looking like some, crazy middle school kid playing the drums extremely loudly, or like a rock drummer on a touring act who just wants to look big and flashy. But the thing is, if we're focusing on sound quality and smoothness and speed, that means we're actually not trying to play super loud, for one thing, and we're not trying to have a ton of crazy monkey arm motion up here. And so having your hi-hats lower is actually going to help you with this. And that's an adjustment that I had to make at this time, of gradually lowering my hi-hats. There was a day when I had them really high because I didn't want my hands to get tangled up, where I started to learn, you know what, if I use this windshield wiper motion here with my right stick, then okay, I can move it out of the way of my left hand, even if I have the hi-hats this much higher than the snare. We're at about the T or the R in Firth, a Vic Firth. I've got a practice pad on my snare, but that kind of gives you a general idea, about 6 inches, no more than 7 inches higher than the snare. Then at that point, you can still avoid the tangle up, because this stick moves out of the way for this one. And most importantly, you can get this comfortable angle where you're not having to be awkwardly up here, and you're not ending up too steep. That's important, because this angle definitely is important, where you want to have this gradual angle. It's not too steep, it's not too shallow. I don't know exactly what degree the angle is. I know some of you engineers are like, all right, what degree is this angle? Let me get this exactly right. Let me get my hi-hats exactly the same as yours, Steven. If you want to do that, that's great. But that's not the, the critical point here. The point is just find what's comfortable for you. Find where does your arm naturally want to rest when you're playing your hi-hats? And is it this nice gradual angle? If not, lower the hi-hats a little bit, raise them a little bit, whatever you got to do here. If your hi-hats are really low, you might actually want to raise them up a bit, but odds are either they're about where you need them to be or they might even be too high. Most of the time we need to lower our hats, not raise them. So gradual angle like this, and if you're trying to play quickly and smoothly, use the neck. You can go to the shoulder if you want a little bit more volume, but the neck is where you're going to get that maximum response. So that's just step one. I know we spent a lot of time there, but hey, that is huge. That is transformative, because as soon as I changed that stick position, this was about 8 years ago, it was just like night and day. It was like, wait a second, now my hi-hat playing actually kind of sounds like Aaron Sterling's. Oh, my hi-hat playing kind of sounds like Paul Mabry's. You know what? This actually resembles a little bit like what Jeff Porcaro's doing in Rosanna. I actually feel like I'm doing something good for once. And so you start to notice these things when you make those simple adjustments. And so my hope is that if you're a total beginner, you're able to start off on the right foot here and get some massive results just doing that. Now, a couple more things though, we're not done yet. Step number 2, now this is also a quick adjustment. We'll look at my left foot down here. So hi-hat looseness, step number 2, we want to optimize our hi-hat looseness. So what this means, here's the deal. You get a little bit more response out of your hi-hats if they're closed very tightly. If I press down like this with my heel up, I'm pressing down on the hats with my big toe, and I drop the stick here on the edge, hey, that was a lot of rebound, right? We can get a lot of rebound when they're super tight, because that means they're not sloshy, they're not absorbing the stick, they're actually sending the energy back out, which is nice. So we get maximum response, but listen to that sound. It's not musical, it just kind of sounds, you kind of hear that ringing, that humming sound in the hats, and they're so tight that all we're hearing is the sound of wood on metal. We're not hearing the sound of the hi-hats actually interacting with each other, which is the purpose of the hats. And so we're just hearing, we might as well be playing up here. Which isn't wrong, it's just most of the time that's not the sound we want if we're trying to create something smooth and cohesive that has this nice glue to it to pull a groove together. So what if instead of having my foot positioned like this, where my heel is up and my toes pressing down, instead of having them super tight, what if I lower my heel, I just relax a little bit. Notice how the pitch kind of dropped, like the pitch dropped, we got this nice, thick, buttery, smooth kind of sound. This is something I think, I want to say Jeff Porcaro said this. I'm going to give him credit because I don't think I came up with this. I think Jeff Porcaro said this in one of those, there's a bunch of old videos from the late 80s, early 90s. You can find of him teaching the Rosanna Shuffle and him teaching different grooves and hi-hat. There's videos of Jeff Porcaro teaching hi-hat. And something that I'm pretty sure he said, somebody can check me on this, somebody can go find this video. He talks about how the key to a smooth hi-hat sound is just loosening the hats just a little. And so instead of having them super tight, just loosen them a bit. And it just gives this nice smoothness and a little bit of note thickness. And the other funny thing about this, when you add a little bit of note thickness, a little bit of thickness can cover a multitude of sins with sloppiness on the hi-hat. Let's say that your hand is not precise and perfect. Let's say that your molar is a little bit sloppy and it's not totally smooth. Well, that's going to really be exposed when the hi-hats are tight, because everything is exposed with tight, short sounds. But if you allow a little bit of thickness, that kind of helps mask that, and it kind of helps smoothen out your playing, even if it's not perfect. So just a tip there for any beginner or even intermediate player who's still working on the molar and it's not completely smooth yet, but a little bit of note thickness will make it feel smoother even if it's not. So remember, in order to do that, just have your heel resting down, and it's important to position your foot well on the foot plate of the hi-hat pedal. Don't try to be way up here. This was my other problem. Years ago, I was always up here running into the hi-hat stand. I've had this stand forever, and actually you might be able to see, I don't know if you can see from the camera down here on my left foot, I have this piece of cloth wrapped around the chain right here at the end of the foot plate. You can see it right here. The reason I put that there years ago was because my foot was running into the chain and it was tearing up my shoes. So I thought, well, let me just wrap up the chain. That way that'll solve my problem. What I then realized was that my problem is not the chain, my problem is my bad technique and my foot being way up here so that I'm sounding like that all the time. Versus if you slide down here, give yourself a couple inches, that allows you to have this smooth sound that's not all choked up. You could even err on the looser side like that. Either way, keep your heel down, play around with those subtle adjustments in the amount of pressure that your foot and your toes put on the foot plate, because a tiny change makes a big difference. And so what you want to do is practice playing, listening, paying attention to what your left foot feels like, and you'll get more in tune with how much pressure do I need to put in for this sound, how much pressure do I need for this sound, and you'll get better and better at it as you connect that hand with that foot, and they start to operate as one unit. That's really the secret to good hi-hat playing. Your right hand, especially if you're playing right-handed like this, your right hand's on the hats a lot. If you can really connect that right hand with that left foot, which is kind of a weird relationship, right? Because it's right, left. But if you can do that, that's how you really begin to operate the hi-hat as its own instrument, and you're able to really pull that full expressiveness out of it. So those two things are really important: stick placement and angle, all that good stuff, and what your left foot is doing. So do those two things, and if you do, that's massive transformation just here while you're watching this lesson. But we're not quite done yet. We've got one more thing that we want to do before we go. Third thing that we need to optimize, we need to make sure that we are maintaining consistent timekeeping on the hi-hats. What do I mean by this? We need to be consistent and even, not just with our time, like with our timing, locking in with the metronome, but also with our dynamics. So it's really interesting when we examine drumming feel, like what is the secret to great feel? When we listen to Aaron Sterling, Paul Mabry, Steve Jordan, Jeff Porcaro, all the drummers who are just masters of groove and creating great feel, especially on the hi-hats. I think all of those guys I would consider masters of the hi-hat. When we listen to their playing, something else they all have in common besides these basic things that we just talked about, the optimization things, what they all have in common is consistency with dynamics and consistency with time. And those are the two elements of feel. It's kind of like an x-axis and a x-axis and a y-axis, kind of those two things, and they're both very important. And what's very interesting, though, is that even if your timing is not perfect, if your dynamics are even and steady, your audience will perceive that as perfect time. And so really that's the more critical element of this. If you can be even with your dynamics, that's going to be far more important than actually being even with your time. And so what we actually want to be able to do, if we're playing a groove, something super simple, if we're just playing a simple groove, we want to decide what are our dynamics going to be like on the hats and how do we maintain those. Let's say we're going to play something like this. So maybe we're doing kind of a loud, soft, loud, soft, loud, soft, kind of like that. We'll decide that, okay, that's what we're going to do, and we're going to make sure that that happens predictably each time. Compared to, here would be a bad version. That was so haphazard, and in trying to make that haphazard, I was messing up my dynamics on kick and snare too, so nothing felt good. The key to good feel here is just even dynamics. Now, it doesn't mean that every hit has to be the same. Yes, we could play. That's also kind of uninteresting. We could go dun 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 dun. That's fine to have mixed dynamics. That's musical. But we want to make sure we're keeping those the same each time, and that our gun 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 gun, that's super repetitive and it feels like a train rolling down the tracks and it's predictable. Gun 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 gun. Even if we changed it and did something kind of weird like this. We did something weird like that where the dynamics are all over the place. Still, the important thing is that we're doing the same thing each time, so the listener can settle into that. And also that backbeat is consistent each time. And so that creates that reliable, consistent feel that an audience perceives as comfortable and professional and solid. It doesn't matter that I just played all of that without a metronome and my timing was definitely not perfect. That doesn't matter. It felt fine because the dynamics were smooth and even. And so that's so critical that you have smooth, even dynamics in your playing, and that of course the time is good too. And so practice as you're working on any of this hi-hat stuff, whether you're playing like a thicker hi-hat sound like that, like Vultures by John Mayer, Steve Jordan on drums. You're doing that, make sure it's in time, practice playing it in time, but also really listen to the dynamics, really listen to the sound of that. If you're playing a groove that's like this. just practice being super even and predictable and consistent with that. My snare was super sploshy there. You could probably hear how the snare wires were just echoey and loose. Maybe you like that sound. It's kind of cool, but I tightened it up there because that was a little bit too sloshy. But practice just listening to the hi-hats. As you're playing anything, practicing anything, listen to the hats. Pay attention to what are they sounding like. Listen to what they're doing, and if you can focus your ear to the hats as you play, even as you're playing different stuff around the kit, if you can really pay attention to that, your ear will become more in tune with what you're doing so that you'll be able to control it more and be more dynamically and consistent time-wise. I have another lesson here on the channel about feel, about creating good feel and pocket on the drums, and we go more in depth with this whole thing of time versus dynamics and how do we control each of those and which is more important. It's very interesting. I think this kind of stuff is fascinating, but it's what you start to notice as you observe a lot of the best drummers in the world. They are masters of consistent dynamics as well as consistent time that might be near perfect, but nobody has perfect time. You can't achieve perfect time, but you can theoretically achieve perfect dynamics, at least 95% of the way there, and that's what your audience will perceive as great feel. So that is the third thing that I know is a little deeper. That's the kind of the long-term thing to be practicing and be aware of. And if you're like, Steven, that kind of went over my head, I don't exactly know what I need to practice there, that's okay. I'm going to link another lesson in the description for more detail on that, so that once you've gotten those first two steps of stick placement and hi-hat looseness, left foot placement, once you've gotten that squared away and you're ready to tackle this third step, there's an additional lesson that you can dive into and really go in depth with that. So hey, if you go through these steps, here's what will happen if you practice this stuff. Your groove will feel better. That's huge. Your groove will feel better. Your playing will automatically be more in the pocket, as musicians like to say. In other words, it's just more intentional, purposeful, and professional sounding. You'll sound better recorded. So if you start recording yourself, you're going to sound great. You'll feel more musical, and that is tremendously satisfying, feeling more musical, because when you feel musical, you have more fun. When you have more fun, you practice more and you get more done. You make more progress. So hey, question for you as you go. What is your hi-hat weakness? Is it stick placement or foot control? Or is it something deeper like dynamic or time consistency? My guess is that it might just be the stick placement. It might be what your left foot is doing. It might be something simple like that that you can solve here today as you go through this lesson with me. So what's your hi-hat weakness? What's that one thing you can fix right now? Let me know in the comments below, or don't let me know if you don't want to. Point is, identify what it is and fix it. You now know how. So I hope this lesson has been super helpful and valuable to you. Be sure to grab the Know What to Practice 3-part practice routine guide. That's going to help you out a whole bunch across the board with drumming growth. So go grab that, my free gift to you. As always, stay non-glamorous. Know that you can do this. I'll see you on the next lesson.